couple of weeks back, we were talking about the Nintendo Direct, and we were discussing the viability of Star Wars Outlaws running on a handheld, bearing in mind that, well, what can we say? This is an extremely demanding engine. And there are still question marks about current gen titles that are really pushing the cutting edge running on a handheld, right? Rightfully so. I mean, it is, a resource constrained device. And the existing PC handhelds that we have struggled. And there were some question marks over whether the footage we saw was the Switch 2 version at all. And Oliver, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we now have an answer to that.
I think we have a pretty good idea. And I think the answer to that question is probably no, because this footage that we have here, it has some, I have some concerns about it. On the visual front, I actually think it looks all right. Clearly they've retained ray tracing. You can see some ray tracing noise, it looks like, on the railing there, which is quite characteristic of Outlaws. Who knows exactly what kind of modifications they've made to their system there, but at least it looks kind of like that system from Star Wars Outlaws that exists in the consoles currently. There's also some reflections at 12 seconds, which is, maybe SSR there, but also it looks like they have some kind of fallback potentially when that information isn't available. They also retain depth of field, which is nice. Again, bunch of features you would not ever even think of on a Switch 1 probably. The resolution is pretty low here, although it's looks pretty low. Presumably it's pretty low. It's hard to tell because we only have a 1080p rip, and all the footage here is shown in that kind of inset in that handheld screen. So presumably we are looking at handheld footage as well, which is an interesting way to show off this game for the first time, effectively for the first time. But I think the big issue here is performance. So in the shooting sequence here, I counted it out by hand and it was running at about 19 frames per second at worst, which is not very good. The cutscene with the stormtroopers runs better, and some other segments of this trailer run better than that. That's like clearly the worst, but it's dropping frames throughout pretty much. Though this trailer is encoded at 30 frames per second, so that might make the frame rate drops here look a little bit worse than they would normally at 60 hertz. So yeah, I am concerned about this one, especially like given that, not to get too much, I don't know what process produced this obviously, but with a trailer, typically you're showing off your game at its best, right? And in this case, it's like, well, this is not a very good best. If it is the best, obviously they're still in development. They've still got a number of months to go here, but I'd like to see some pretty substantial improvements on this effort, or else it doesn't really seem like it's going to produce a great result.
It's certainly a curious decision simply to show handheld footage, assuming it is the handheld footage, of course. I believe it is. Otherwise, why frame it with that handheld vendor there?
Mm-hmm.
But similar to Cyberpunk 2077, I've got to admire their ambition here in trying to get this running on, what is allegedly a 560 megahertz 30 series GPU with a very few amount of CUDA cores. Alex, don't know what you make about this.
Well, I will echo everything Oliver said. I don't think this is the way I would have shown the game off, because I think every reaction I saw from this was, that looks rough. And that does look rough. Not in the visuals. Visuals are fine in this 1080p extremely compressed footage that's smaller than the actual feed. But that looked fine enough, but it was just the performance. And from the development standpoint, I'm very curious to see what exactly, this has to use hardware. This has to use RT to work at all. They did not produce a version of this game that works with like pro base lighting like they did in the Division 1 and 2, right? That is the only thing that makes this game work. So they are using ray tracing on this, but I'm curious of whether or not they have ported all the ray tracing work they've done from PC, or if they're using their custom ray tracing that does not take advantage, at least on the PC, you can turn off hardware ray tracing, or you can run the game without a hardware enabled GPU, and it will actually do all the ray tracing. On the console, they do essentially the same thing, where it only then, using the low-level APIs that are provided by Sony and Microsoft, that they allow those hardware intersection units for triangles and BVH boxes to be utilized, but all the BVH build, etc., all that is done with their own way. And I'm curious to see here if they are actually going to leverage whatever ray tracing API they have on the Nintendo Switch 2, or if they are going to be using their I would say strange but efficient custom thing. And the reason why I'm wondering about that is because with their custom thing, they wouldn't take advantage of any of the hardware traversal unit stuff that is available on an Ampere level GPU, like we'd see in the Switch 2. I don't know. I feel like when this comes out, regardless of its quality, I want to get an interview with them and I want to ask them questions because this is crazy. This is by far the most ambitious title. I think even way more ambitious than Cyberpunk.
And launching according to this trailer in early September. That's so early into this console's life cycle to see like a big impossible port like this with tons of ray tracing in this gigantic open world. One of the best looking games on current generation consoles and PC, and to see it on this console at this time is really extraordinary.
Yeah, it's nuts. And like I said, with Cyberpunk, you can turn off RT, and they've done that, but this game you can't. So it has all these big baggages coming with it to just even run in the first place, on top of the open world, on top of all the other stuff. So yeah, this is probably the most interesting port, and I want an interview, and I don't want to have a Switch 2 necessarily, but I would like to see this just running in person. Because I think this would be crazy to look at. Yeah.
We actually had a comment in the comments to one of the directs where it just says, "Why do you get Alex talking about Switch 2? Doesn't care."
Yeah. Well, here's a good example. I like this. This is cool. I like seeing ray tracing being scaled down. I actually think that's fun.
That is absolutely a lot of fun. Yeah. I mean, what can I say? The thing that we've been talking about with regards to the kind of horsepower level of Switch 2, the sort of idea has been, well, any game that's built from a cross-gen perspective shouldn't be a problem. There should be scalability there. But this game, there is no PS4 version. There is no Xbox One version. They've got to work from whatever they have from their existing PC version in terms of how they scaled that, I imagine, and then customize still further, which I think is quite astonishing. I think from my perspective, although you're quite right, I have just downloaded the file. It's a 6.8 megabyte MKV. So there's not much to go on here in terms of raw visual information, but it's not as if I'm looking at this and seeing a game that actually seems to be running at a noticeably poor resolution as such. You can see that there's, the detail is there. It's not as if you're being dramatically shortchanged. But yeah, I mean, interested to see more. Just wondering if they could do like a performance mode that stabilizes performance but is a lot more blurry.
Yeah, just blur. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, but I guess we'll just have to keep looking for new media on this and waiting for the game to come out.